All right. I think it's working. Hey, Daniel. Let me know if this sounds okay. All right. And I've only said a few things. So, hey, Steve. How are you tonight? All right. All right. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I wanted to run through some more Regolith stuff and i3 stuff. And I've spent a few more hours playing around with this, and so I'm a bit more comfortable with navigating around, opening windows, all of that good stuff. So I feel like this time, my last stream, I don't know, it was pretty rough. I kind of didn't know what I was doing, and that was fine. I think I'm not like embarrassed by that or anything, but I'd like to provide a more um, informed opinion, so to speak. So I wanted to go ahead and run through using the desktop and configuring it. And so I've got a couple notes and things together. Desktop. So really what I'd like to get done tonight, if possible, is to just cover using the desktop and customizing the system itself and how that works, comparing Regolith's i3 implementation to the stock i3 implementation that you get on if you just installed i3 with Ubuntu or something like that, and then and also another customized i3 distribution, Manjaro, which I think does a pretty good job of providing a good i3 experience out of the box, because that's the promise of Regolith, right? They've done some work for you to configure it so that you don't have to do all the work yourself. All right, so, and then hopefully too, we get some folks in chat and we can get some questions answered and things like that. So, all right. So this is what organized looks like. Yeah, you know, funny enough, I planned on doing this earlier in the day and getting a little more of this put together, but I ended up doing a lot of this in like the last 20 minutes. So in one hand, that's good because it's all fresh in my mind. On the other, it's not, because I would have rather been a little more organized than I am. So that's just how it goes. The best laid plans of mice and men, so they say. Let me start by looking at browser here. I've got a couple ideas I wanted to just kind of throw out there. So when I think of a tiling window manager, it's it's all about the space itself, right? Maximizing the space. The whole point of it is making the most use of the space you have available on your desktop. And so that to me means it's like a canvas, right? You've got this much space and you're putting things on the canvas and what goes where, and you control the proportions of it and all of that. And it occurred to me that as someone who builds websites, that's actually very similar to the CSS box model. Box model, but that's maybe not the best term for it, but just the way that layouts in a web page work. You've got one big piece of real estate, and you have to divide it up into smaller sections that are generally just boxes. And then you decide how big those boxes are and where they go, and are they, you know, like in this example, the full width header and then 3 in the middle and then full width on the bottom, and you're controlling the size of these. And really, tiling window manager works in pretty much the same exact way. You've got this amount of space, and you're going to decide where you put your things on the screen in a way that makes sense to you. The point of a web page is to convey an idea and to allow for navigation and stuff like that. The point of the tiling window manager is to give you total control over that space and the way you'd want to use it. So kind of a goofy idea, but it just popped into my head that I do this, you know, to build websites. I'm doing this all the time. And so now looking at a window manager, I've kind of framed it that way in my mind. Hey, Tony, how's it going today? All right, so when looking at Regolith and getting started, I'm actually going to switch back to the virtual machine, and that way I can just show you in there itself. All right. So here I've got a window, a desktop laid out in a slightly customized way. So if I just were to happen to switch to a, got to capture that key. Hang on one second. Okay. If I were to switch to a different blank desktop, and from here launch any program, whether that's a terminal or a traditional sort of browser window or something. So if I were to open, let's say, a new browser window, it's going to take up the entire screen or the entire canvas. And if I start opening more windows, then it's breaking them into, it's going to divide that logically into either horizontal or vertical frames. And in this case, because the default is to split, I guess that's vertically. Yes. No, the horizontal space, no, horizontally in half. If I keep doing that, then I just keep splitting those windows. And as I close them, it just fills up the available space. So you see on this layout, what I did was open 3 different windows and then change the size of them. And so the way that works is I've got 2 windows open now. And let's say I want to open a new window, but underneath, horizontally, vertically underneath of this window. What I would need to do is change the direction that I'm going to open first. So that's super key backspace. And it's not the easiest thing to see, but there's actually a little blue line that shows up either at the bottom or the right of the window. So if I hit super key backspace, it's now at the bottom. And if I hit super key enter to open a new terminal, you see how it splits it now in that direction. All right, so I've got my 3 windows, but if I look back here now, they're a little bit, they're resized, right? And so it's not a floating window manager where I can just grab this and yank it around. I actually have to do that with the keyboard. So if I switch back to, let's say, the browser window, and what I'm using to switch is the super key and then the arrows. So if I switch back to the browser window and I hit super key R, you'll see on the bottom of the screen, it says resize mode. What this is going to let me do is use the arrow keys to actually resize this window. And so I'm going to give it about that much space, then hit escape, and resize mode's gone now. So now this is kind of locked where it is. And if I come back over to this window, which is the top right window, and I do resize again, because it's split this way, when I use my up and down arrows, it's going to split it up, it's going to move it and resize it up and down. And so this is a common layout for me, because at the top, really all I want is a very small window to run a command. And then on the bottom, I want to have maybe something open in a text editor. So for example, if I look back at my first screen here, I've got the top right terminal for running a command, and then in the bottom, I've got the config file for Regolith actually opened up and can, oops, I didn't mean to do that yet. Oh no. So there we go, sorry. And can then use that file, edit that file, switch back up, run a command, switch back down, edit the file, and then switch back over. So instead of clicking or alt tabbing, you are actually just using your either the super key and the arrows and things like that. So so this is sort of how you divide up your screen. And the other maybe possibly more practical thing is that you wouldn't have a browser window and these things together. You might have dedicated desktops, right, workspaces. And so that's what I've been doing, switching back and forth here. So I'm on the second desktop, and if you look down on the bottom left, it'll actually show you which desktop you're on, and it spawns them as it needs them. So if you go to, let's say 3, now you see 3 shows up there, but as I switch away from it, it goes away. But if I were to go to 3 and then open a terminal and switch away, 3 is still there. So if you have something actively running on a desktop, it will stay open. And if you don't, it'll just collapse it down, and that way you don't end up with, because this has 20 desktops configured by default, and you can imagine if there were all 20 open at one time, it would just be the entire bar, and it would be kind of, it wouldn't really tell you anything. All you would know is that the 20 are there and configured. This way it actually tells you, like, hey, there's something on desktop 6 or workspace 6, what's over there, and you can switch over and look at it. So it makes sense to have it spawn them as it needs them and then get rid of them as it doesn't. $20 seems like a lot. It does. It absolutely does. But I think if you were to be the type of person that this is your method of using a computer and you logically divide everything up, because like I said, most people maybe aren't going to be running a lot of stuff on one workspace, because it does get crowded. The advantage of a floating window is that you can stack them. Tiling, you're taking up just the space that's there. So ultimately, if you're running, you think about, like, I've got just on my computer right now, I've got the browser, file manager, text editor, VirtualBox, OBS. I've got all these programs open. I couldn't possibly have them all open on one screen because it'd be so small you wouldn't be able to see them. So really, what you're going to end up doing is using a lot of different workspaces just so that you can have space to do the things that you're doing. And the other thing that's neat is if you really were getting into this and using it, you can actually set applications to open on specific desktops. So if I always want my browser, or I always want Telegram, like maybe I want a split screen of Telegram and Discord, and I always want that to be workspace 7, just because I can set it so that when that launches in the config file, it knows to put it on a specific desktop. And so 20 sounds like a lot, but whenever you memorize the fact that workspace 7 is your social interaction workspace, then you just sort of remember like, oh, I just go there. You know, I'm not actively switching things around 20 different desktops necessarily. I've dedicated it to this specific one or the specific use case or whatever I'm doing. And so, okay, so this isn't necessarily the way that you might use it. I mean, I don't think this isn't like a hard to see. It's not that small. This is perfectly usable. But let's say, you know, you wanted a browser in full screen. Well, then you're probably going to go to a full screen and just open the browser like this, and then you can switch back and forth, you know, to get to the ones that you want. And again, I'm switching by just holding the super key and then hitting the number. And if you want above 10, then you hit shift. So if I want to get to 14, I hit super shift 14 or super shift 4. Or is it super control? Yeah, sorry, super control 4, 5, 6, and you see it's 15, 16, 14, 15, 16. All right. So let's go back real quick to, oh, I'm on the wrong thing. You can't even see what I was doing. All right. Let's go back to just my desktop here for a second and look at the notes. So opening and closing windows, I kind of got that. Closing is super shift Q. Floating window, or changing the tiling direction I talked about, so you're splitting horizontally or vertically. Moving windows, so you saw me do it. I wasn't doing it on purpose, but let me go back and show you. So if I have, let's say, a terminal and then a browser again, and you see it's just going to keep opening to the side. Maybe I meant for that browser to be on the left. I can hit super shift and then the arrows and move them back and forth. And then if I come over here and super backspace and super enter, and I had these two terminals and I wanted to switch them around, I can do super shift up and down. And you may have noticed that I had these arranged, so I had resized them. And then when I moved it, it reset it. And so it's in order for it to be able to continue to tile properly, and if you start moving things around, it really can't just arbitrarily split up the space. So it's going to have to reset sizing at some point. So you saw me fat finger the key combinations a bunch of times, so that could be annoying, but it's just that you just get used to it and it's really not that big of a deal. But if I now if I move this window left, it's going to split it. I move it down, it's going to take up the whole bottom. If I move it back to the right and down, then it puts it back where it was. But you see now that they're divided in equal halves instead of before I started doing all of that, it had been, you know, more like this. So just know that kind of happens. And I believe I'm still pretty much a newbie at i3, but I think there may be a way to actually lock positions so that you don't do that. I could be wrong, but it seems like the type of thing you'd want to do if you needed to. All right, so another convention here, another thing that you need to know is that it can be annoying. So let's say this is my layout right now and I've got my browser in this, and I need to get to my settings, which is super C. If I do that, it sticks it down in the bottom here, and you can still use it because it does put scroll bars on, but it's a little clunky. And this is really, so because of this mixed environment where you've got GNOME applications and applications that are essentially designed to be floating windows, and you're stuffing them into this small space. They actually give you a method to float this window so that it can act like it can be a floating window. So if I hit super F, that's full screen, super shift F, it will allow me to then float this window. So I can use it and move it around. So if you absolutely needed to, you could switch, do this and have a floating window. But for things like configurations and certain other applications, like it just makes sense to have this pop out as a window. As I mentioned earlier, where you can have programs go to specific workspaces, you can also have rules set where if you always want this to launch as a floating window, you can set that as part of the. So I hit Super C to get this to pop up, and you can just set as part of that shortcut that it opens as a floating window. The other thing is you can actually have window rules so that it's not necessarily a shortcut, but there are ways to make sure that when a program launches, that it's launching the way you want it, either where you want it on a desktop or the way you want it as a floating window. So this is the just normal GNOME system settings panel, because this is Ubuntu 1904 underneath. And you would be able to just configure your system like you normally would in any other version of Ubuntu. So, and then when I close this, it just goes away. Daniel, yes. So in the config file, you can, if I go, where's it at? If I go to my config file here, this is right at the top. It actually tells you define the workspaces, and so the name is in the quote here. So like if I said 7, like I said. So I'd mentioned maybe making 7, my social applications, so I can say social if I wanted to, and save that out, and then do a refresh. And now if I switch to 7, maybe I didn't do that right. Well, let me go to. Remember that you always can get to your cheat sheet. So if you go to a blank desktop or blank workspace, Super Shift ? Will bring up your cheat sheet, and you can always refer back to this. So what I want to do is actually restart the session, and don't actually see that in here. The premise is when you make a change to your configuration file in i3, you would make the change, save the change, and then refresh the window manager, and it should just live load those changes. Live load, it should refresh and load your changes. For some reason, it's not on the shortcut list here. So let's actually go back and check their website. We have a special guest tonight. It's my daughter's favorite toy, or plushie, or friend in the whole world. Okay, so on the configuring page, they explain how to configure and refreshing the UI. Currently, you must log out and back in to see the changes to your X resources. Which seems a little awkward. So, they're saying reload i3. You know what? Let me find it in here because it's a shortcut. All of the shortcuts are defined in here. So if I search for, I think, reload. Yes. Mod Shift C. Okay, I did not know that one. The Mod Shift C. Yep. All right, so now that should have taken, and if I go to 7, nope, that's weird. Okay, I obviously don't understand how to do this. I thought I did. So to answer your question, there is a way to do that. I'm almost sure. It could be the bar itself isn't showing it. I was unprepared for the question. Apparently. Yeah. I thought that's the way that worked here. Maybe it doesn't like a whole word. Let me try just S. Alt Shift C. 7. Nope. Maybe if I open a window. If I switch away from it. Well, I'll have to look at that one. Okay. Let's just change it back while I'm thinking of it. So the other, let's look back at the, sorry, I keep forgetting to switch the content. So the other thing I wanted to cover was launching applications that aren't tied to a keybind. So there's no start menu or menu. They start menu, it's burned into my head. There's no menu at the bottom that you're clicking to load a fly up menu. And so how do you get to all the stuff that's installed on a system? I mean, you can't even tell what's here right now, right? I mean, you could go into the apt or dpackage and see what's installed. But so how do I get to my application, to my programs that are installed here? And the answer is there is a menu system built in. So you'd either hit super space, and drun is the essentially like a search menu, like you would hit super key to pop up in most DEs, and that's what this is here. So if I wanted a text editor, if I wanted and it is in there is an order here, and I think there are some shortcuts that you can actually change the orders and things like that. There it is. If I keep hitting left, I think it takes me back to different menus. But the point is, you're probably going to be just searching and then launching something. I'm going to launch Rhythmbox, and here you go. So super space, and that gets you to launch your applications. Super shift space is a run dialog. So essentially you can run something that then runs in the background or something like that. You can just run a command, and that's really the only difference. Most programs you can run by just using the name anyway. So either one kind of works, but in this, you're going to see every single executable that's in user bin. So you're not going to get to what you're looking for right away through this run dialog. The other thing you might have noticed is that the theme is different. So the Regolith theme that comes with this, the contrast, to me, it was just way too hard to see. Let me go back and and show you. See, I'll just reset it so you can see it. Nope. What am I doing? Backspace. Yes. Yes. All right. So this resources file, you can set styles and colors. So the terminal I changed from solarized dark. So I'll put it back just so you can see it. And then the fonts I left the same. The styles I set Ubuntu dark instead of Regolith, so I'll set that back to Regolith. And then the rest of this was just the way it was. So if I save this, and also I'll step back and say that in order to even get this local X resources file, I had to copy it from the it's Etsy Regolith styles root. So the original file is called root, and you actually copy that file to this path. And when this path exists, it'll override that root file. If you were to delete this, actually, if I were to just rename this, then it would go back to whatever was in the root. The reason that they did this was so that if they need to make changes and updates as they move forward, this root file can change, and you can still have your customizations, and it won't blow things out for you. But they explain in here, so once you copy that, and you just saw what I did, you can change some of the themes very easily. And once you do that, the only way to get it, well, actually, no, that's not true. I was going to say they recommend that you log out and log back in to refresh the whole session, but you can actually run this command and then do the Control-Shift-C or Super-Shift-C. You won't see it in active application, so I actually have to close the browser and then come back in. Nope, apparently not. Control-Shift-R. Nope, okay, I'm gonna have to log out. Let's close everything. And Control-Shift-E is how you get out and end your session. So let's log back in. And now if I launch a browser, it should, or a terminal. Yeah, see, it's that style that it originally came with. And see, for me, the contrast on this is just so bad. Like, look at the window title here and the address. I mean, even typing in there, it's so light. And, you know, maybe people like that aesthetic, and it could just be that my eyes aren't good enough, but whew, that is hard to see. You know, it's just hard to use. You look at the, you know, the settings. And yeah, it's just, I don't get it. I mean, I guess if you worked in the dark and you had no other light and you had a very dim screen, like this would probably be enough contrast. So maybe that's the person that makes this, just that's their preference. But for me, yeah, it's just too much. So let me go back in and I'll show you what I did to change that. So like I said, you copy the file and then you can edit it and change. So I went from solarized dark to Nord. And this is for the colors for the terminal. Fonts I left. Theme I went for Ubuntu dark. So once you do that, and then you save it. And let's get out of here. And now when I launch a terminal, it's got that, it's just a lighter gray. And when I launch the browser, it's got a dark theme on it. So just easier to see for me. All right, let's see what's happening over here. Yes, the silly bear. It's actually called Kitty, and it's got a cat head and arms, and then it's a blanket body. And she's had that. She's 7 now. She's had that since she was born. We gave her a choice of different toys, plushy toys, when she was born, and she grabbed that thing with those little, baby fists, and it's been her best friend forever, and she absolutely cannot live without it. And so just a funny little story on that. I was traveling a lot for work, and also just was all over the place, and we had planned a vacation where I had to go somewhere first, but we were going to the airport and flying out at the same time. I was on a different flight than they were. They flew to New Jersey and I flew to Las Vegas. And we had been sharing a carry-on bag. Just, she was a baby, and it was, well, she was probably 2 maybe. And we were sharing a carry-on bag, and you probably already see where this is going. But I had that bag and I took it with me. I got all the way to Las Vegas, and I opened the bag and I looked in there, and there's Kitty. And I'm like, oh, this is bad. So I called my wife, and she's like, please tell me you have Kitty. And I'm like, yes, I have Kitty, but unfortunately we're on the opposite end of the country. So I paid like $100 to get it overnighted, like FedEx overnight, just because you gotta have Kitty. And so ever since then, we've been very careful. Oh my. So shortcuts to refresh. Yeah. Contrast is hard to see. Old timer amendments would make that hard to remember those keybinds. I agree, and that having the cheat sheet is there, but honestly, so a couple things, like if you were forced to use it and you have no choice, you're going to adapt and learn. It just is the way it is. You will learn those sort of, so when you look at that list of shortcuts that comes up when you do the meta shift question mark, there's what, 15 or 20 here. Some of these you're not going to use. Like, you're not going to use some of these very often. The ones you will use are, the top ones, the going to workspaces, switching between, and, so basically the top half here. So what, 10, 15, you're going to use those all the time. And that's really the ones that you need to know and need to have the muscle memory for. The rest of it, that's what this is here for. Or you can go look on the website, and, and the other thing is too, just to sort of backtrack a little bit, and the reality is that most people have no need to run a tiling window manager, nor any interest in it. It's interesting to me, and the reason that I was glad we were going to do this as a challenge wasn't because I thought everybody was going to switch over to it and think it was like sensational. It was really more about just trying something new, trying something different, knowing that there are these other things out there, right? I mean, we get used to Windows, which is a single UI, like it is what it is. Mac, same deal. Android, iPhone, they all are the same thing. And, Android, you can customize different launchers and things like that, but ultimately it works exactly the same way. It might look a little bit differently and have different animations or something. The cool thing about this is it is truly a completely different way to use your computer, where you're still using a graphical user interface. It's not like you're just looking at a terminal, but it is just a different way to do it. And I just like the idea that everybody understands that it exists, and that if you ever found yourself in a situation where you're like, trying to get Windows to be in just the right spot, or you're trying to, you're struggling with it. If you had a specific task, right, you could install i3 on top of any existing desktop environment, and it just becomes another session, and you can pop in there, do that thing you need to do, and run it the way you need it to run it. And then when you're done with it, you can switch back to the normal desktop environment and get on with your life. I have no illusion that people have an interest in running this on a day-to-day basis, unless you're a system administrator, a software developer, very specialized. Maybe you're running some sort of like, industrial equipment. There are lots of actual reasons to do something like this. And one of the weakest ones, I think, is just as a general use desktop. And I know there's probably going to be a lot of people that don't agree with that, and that's fine. It's there for if this is how you want to use your computer. DT Derek, he loves to play with these, and there's a lot of people that appreciate this approach, and just knowing that it's there, and yet another cool feature of Linux that you can do things like this. I'm glad that we at least get a chance to talk about it as a group. I know almost everybody's going to say, I didn't like it, or I didn't get it, or I didn't see the point of it. And that's really what I hope to impart. You're going to hear me say this probably again this Saturday, but that is really the point to me, is that this is for that purpose, for those specific use cases. I mean, if I was still a sysadmin and I had, dozens of servers to manage, I would absolutely have a desktop that looked like, let's see, split window here, split window there, split window, something like this, where I've got 4 terminals going, and each one has a, one has a, of course, HTOP isn't installed. Why would HTOP be installed? I'm just doing this to prove a point, but I would have, HTOP running maybe to see the performance of the system. And then I'd have maybe tailing a log somewhere, let's see, fail log, or no, that's not it. Oh, and I think there's another flag I'm missing. Anyway, the point is, you've got logical divisions of your workspace. Think about the gauges of your car, right? When you need to see how fast you're going. Depending on the car, it's going to be different. But if you're one of those crazy people that drives a Mini, it's all the way over out of your line of sight. But most cars have it right in front of you, and there's usually a speedometer and a tachometer, or they're gauges, right? And so in a case where you've got systems that you're trying to do essentially the same thing, watch the system, watch performance, watch logs. This is exactly the right way to do that. So let's see. Yeah, Daniel, the I forget what the proper name for that is, but yeah, the finger mouse, I love those. Absolutely. Tony taking off. All right, man. Yeah, wow. Thanks for coming out. That's super late. I appreciate you stopping by and saying hi. And don't lose sleep over me. Thanks for stopping in, man. Take it easy. So Daniel is a SQL guy. you could see this as a good workflow. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could be monitoring. And the other thing is, if you've got long running queries or you've got something that's a process that needs to be running, having it in a window and being able to look at it, you know, out of the way, but have these other things. Yeah, absolutely. Very useful for that. Okay, I know I'm getting a little long here, so let me go ahead and jump in to we've done all of these. We've done enough customization that I'm really, I mean, you can customize everything. You can customize all your keybinds. You can customize all of your, you know, the layout of the bar at the bottom, the where windows launch, how they launch. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of customizability, and there's no way I could do it justice on here in this setting. So I'm not going to really get into that. I would suggest that you look at the Regolith page on customization, because it goes through, like I explained, where you can grab that file, put it in the right folder, edit the file, and get to you know, how to get into it, edit it, save it, refresh, all of that kind of stuff. And that's just the Regolith theming. And then underneath of that, there's an i3 configuration file that you saw me go into for the workspaces. So again, very customizable. It's all in what you want to make it. But let me jump back to my list. I think that was all I was going to do for my list, other than comparing Regolith's out of the box experience with something like what you get in the stock Ubuntu install of i3, and then something like Manjaro, which also has an i3 spin, and it's I would say, I think Manjaro has been around longer and they've had the benefit of many years of feedback from lots of people, but it's a more complete experience, in my opinion, at this point than Regolith is. And that's not to say that they couldn't catch up and do this as well, but I'm just going to go ahead and jump out of Regolith for now and show you the stock experience on, I have a KDE Neon install. So and I've already installed i3, so what I'll show you is just what you get by default out of the box. Once you install it, you just come down to your session box and make sure you pick i3. And then you would just log in with your normal user. And you're going to see this is a much different experience, right? So this is it. This is what you get. And there isn't a bar here, but it's very tiny. And so you'd probably want to come in and customize that. And then the keyboard shortcuts are pretty much the same. Not entirely, but pretty much. The configuration file is in a different place. So it's actually under... Make that bigger for you. It's under config i3 config. So you want to come in here and look, and so they've got slightly different key bindings, but this is how you could come in and actually take a look and see what those are set as. But the point of me showing you this is that Regolith does do a lot. I mean, so there's, I mean, just from the standpoint of like, there isn't even a wallpaper, right? You install this and it's just a black screen with a bar on the bottom. And the D menu, that menu function where you can launch applications in Regolith, that's not here by default. That's something you have to install and configure. And so out of the box, vanilla i3 is pretty jarring. Like you really need to, it's a lot of work to get it to be as refined and put together as something like Regolith. But like I said, let me show you Manjaro because I just wanted to give a comparison of another system that is already pretty highly customized. So if I jump out of this file, so this is the Manjaro desktop, and let me actually just end the session and log out because I resized the window and it made it funny. Okay. So, you know, nice thing, they've got a little custom login manager screen here, which is just light DM. You know, they've got their normal welcome screen. It's going to help you get around and do things in the system. And then you see that they've got a little conky set up here with the time and the system resources, which is pretty nice. They've got a wallpaper. They've got the same sort of cheat sheet thing that's right here. I think that's a conky as well on the desktop. Their bar is a little more complete. If you click on some of these things, they actually do something. So there's a clipboard manager, the volume. And so it's much more interactive. I mean, even here, there's an update manager. So it's telling me that there's updates to the system. So again, I think this is just the benefit of them having years of supporting this flavor or variant of Manjaro, and just the virtue of building it up and refining it over time versus Regolith. This is, I think, their 1.1 release. So it's a little unfair to say that they, you know, they just haven't had the time to reach this level of refinement yet. And if they continue, I'm sure they will continue to add and improve things to the system. And if you really do enjoy i3 and you don't enjoy Regolith, just know also that there are other options out there. Someone mentioned today in the discourse forum Archman. Archman is an Arch-based distribution that comes with i3 as its default window manager. So there are other options out there if you're looking for maybe a more complete or refined out-of-the-box experience. And you know, if you're using Regolith and enjoying it and just want to compare, I'd say Manjaro is a pretty solid test bed or trial, because like I said, I mean, you could just see the level of the things that they've got done here, and know that their shortcuts are different as well. So, but I think that's about all I was really going to cover, and I'm coming up on about an hour. So I think I'll just jump in and do some chat, and then we'll call it a night. So, yeah, Daniel, that black background, it's a little jarring. It's a little much. It's not that hard, you know, to change it. You can get a wallpaper manager, or you can just set an image. I mean, you know that from using it yourself, but yeah, it's. I've come around to the point of i3 is not going to be to impress anyone out of the box, right? You know, the other thing I wanted to that just popped into my head is i3 can be beautiful. It can be actually pretty amazing. So examples of that would be, change my window here. Nope, that is not the right one. Okay. There we go. So what popped into my head was Reddit's Unix porn. Not uniporn, Unix. And if you, if any desktop environment, if you're ever interested in seeing like what nutty people who have way too much time on their hands do, if you come in here and search I3, there are going to be just hundreds of different examples of people doing really crazy things. So here's one with huge gaps, and I did forget that part. You can adjust the gaps between windows on the fly, and there's just it's meta plus and minus, I think, and it'll just separate. It adds a little extra padding. If you kind of think back to this example again, and this would be the margin between the boxes, and that's I3 gaps is a variant of I3, and that's essentially what it does is adds those gaps. But yeah, some of these they're really amazing. You know, look at this. This guy's got all the different colors, and he's just hitting. He's got it bound to keyboard shortcuts, and so he's literally just switching all of this stuff on the fly. He's hitting a keyboard shortcut, the desktop refreshes, pops up, and this is what I'm saying. Some people want that amount of control, and they care that much about it that this is what they'll do. And I think it's awesome. Some of this is truly just beautiful, but realize that it takes a lot of work. And when you hear someone like Derek talk about dot files, and Kevin will be really happy that I mentioned dot files, and I'm going to say dot files a third time just for Kevin. This is what they're talking about. So you do all this work and you put this effort in, and then people are like, that's so cool. How do I get that? And you share your dot files. So that's where those come into play. So when you hear DT and Derek and other people talk, Luke Smith and others, and they're talking about their dot files, that's what they mean. You could install i3, make sure you have the right applications installed, and then get their dot files, apply them to your system, and then boom, you've got this really cool layout. Hey, Rocco, what's going on, man? How you doing? You came in. I'm probably about 5 minutes away from shutting down. I think people had enough of my rambling for one night. Doing this by yourself as opposed to having open chat with other people, it's interesting. I know I'm not talking to myself, but it feels like I am. So, actually, give me just 1 second. I need a 1-minute break to do something, and I'll be right back. Yeah, the gaps on if you look at the Regolith homepage, the screenshot they show, those are a little extreme. I agree. But you know what, I'm going to jump back into Regolith just for a second, because I do want to show that and why gaps actually make sense. All right, so why gaps make sense. In this instance, I've got two windows with, you know, very different contrast. So it's easy to visually look at this desktop. But if I go back to my, which desktop was that? 5. So you look here. Now, if I were to adjust this down, that's with no gaps. And hopefully you can see that. So it's just sort of an amorphous blob of color, right? And you can, there are definitely pin size lines there that you can see the separation. But in an instance like this, being able to adjust those gaps and provide some contrast, I mean, of course, you can take it to a ridiculous degree. But even just, so that's nothing, that's one, even one pop-up, which is probably 10 pixels, you know, that in and of itself gives you, and if you have the, you know, you've got the wallpaper in the background that's giving you that bright contrast, which is why I think they did this. And so when you have that in the background and you pull these gaps up, it does allow you to visually separate those things. And again, if you think of like the analogy of the gauges in your car, the gauges aren't literally stacked on top of each other. I mean, there are some gauge clusters that are a cluster something that aren't done very well, but in most cases, the whole point of them is that they're clear and easy to look at and see at a glance. And so the gap, yes, of course, like, you know, you can take it to a silly degree, but even just having that amount helps with like colored windows. And again, a big use case for this is going to be running a bunch of terminals. Steve, I watched your tutorial. It was good. I have some suggestions for you based on some of the things I saw you were doing, and I watched it, and I was watching it sort of half watching and half doing something else. So I'm not entirely sure I caught everything you were doing, but based on what I think I saw, I think I could make a couple, just because I've been putting this together for myself and kind of figuring it out. I think I might have a couple good suggestions for you. So, and yeah, the fact that you did the live tutorial, and that's kind of what I was trying to do. And I have to stop reading while I'm trying to talk. Yes, Rocco, was it exactly 4 pixels? And I would say good for you for knowing that. So anyway, I think that's all I really wanted to cover tonight with Regolith. I wanted to just show you, like I said, the basics of getting around, how to use the windows, the way that things are divided up and used, and workspaces, the importance of that, launching programs, and doing a little bit of light configuration, and then comparing what Regolith offers to stock i3, as well as another distribution like Manjaro i3 that really provides what I would say at this point a better out-of-the-box experience, provided you like Arch. If you prefer an Ubuntu base, obviously Regolith is going to be a better option. So yes, it is fantastic, Rocco. This was a fantastic stream, especially since you showed up at the end. So, all right, guys, that's what I've got. And I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it even slightly informative and possibly entertaining. And I appreciate everybody coming to the chat and hanging out. And I may do a more in-depth video on something like Manjaro or the comparison. I'm not sure yet. I've got some other things going on this week, but I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying doing it, and hopefully folks are getting something out of it. And I will be back soon, or I'll see you in Biddle or something. Have a good night, guys. Or yes. Take care.